Well, the Joffe Bear Hug, as the Bidvest bid for 60% of Adcock has been called, has so far proceeded uneventfully. Analysts are hesitant to call this a hostile takeover, preferring instead to use the term opportunistic to describe the offer. So who will be the winner and will the deal go through? Warwick Lucas from Amare SP Reid joins us to weigh in on the subject. Well, Warren, you've obviously been thinking about the Adcock bid for Adcock, the Bidvest bid for Adcock for most of the day. Can you give us a little of your insights?
Well, clearly it's, from our point of view, it is somewhat opportunistic, but then what good bid isn't opportunistic? I think there's a very real value case that they've got there. It's made by a fund manager. I mean, if you can call Bidvest a fund manager, which in a lot of respects they possibly are, they're custodians of many investments, which they obviously have a very long-term perspective of it, whereas a lot of conventional fund managers have a very short-term view, and from that point of view there's a difference in that Bidvest could be potentially a very good parent for Adcock, because I think the pharmaceuticals industry as a whole going through a very tough time. We're seeing poor results out of pretty much all of them, and a lot of that is extraneous factors like the single exit prices nowhere near matching the fall off in Rand Forex rates, so that's crunching margins.
Although Aspen is holding up very well.
Aspen is holding up. I think part of what helped there is they seem to do some quite nifty footwork in terms of product development. The other thing, Aspen's allocation of the ARV government allocation went up quite nicely in the last period, and in fact in the most recent period so did Adcock's, reversing a prior misfortune where in 2010 they really lost out badly on the last government tender.
So Warwick, if we separate, if we just ignore the Bidvest bid at the moment and just look at Adcock as a standalone business prior to the bid, what were you thinking about the stock? Was it the stock you were keen on buying for your investors, or what was your sort of view? Were you holding Adcock at the time?
It is a stock that we certainly have been looking at buying for investors, and
been looking at buying. You haven't bought.
We've bought some, but not enough, clearly. One of the big factors that has been affecting all the pharma companies has been the issue of MCC approval of their dossiers.
Medicine Control Council approval.
Correct. Now, if you look at the number of pharma listings on the JSE, we've just seen potential buyout for Cipla, potential buyout for Lita. And you say to yourself, well, in this morbid environment, you have these companies coming off. Well, why is that? And the answer is that in the fullness of time, the Medicines Control Council will sort itself out. There are literally hundreds of dossiers across a number of pharma companies backed up there at the moment. There has been a massive capacity problem. You've seen hardly any dossiers go through recently. However, the scuttlebutt is that they are certainly they're getting on top of it. They're putting in systems and electronic processing that will eventually turn that around. And they seem to be training capacity up. And that goes back to my comment earlier about the different kinds of fund managers. Traditional asset managers holding, whose clients typically have a shorter term approach, versus the likes of Brian Joffe, who will sit behind an investment and
so
make
what does the deal mean for the mechanics of Adcock Ingram? So Bidvest goes from 2.5% to 60% shareholder. They obviously have majority control. Do they interfere in the current management system?
I think with that sort of stake, it's inevitable that they would want to get involved. I guess first thing would be at the financial level. I mean, and let's face it, Bidvest have added value in the past to their acquisitions. The question is the number and the timing, and that's where I think a fair bit of controversy it can fairly be raised. The one question is that it's a control premium, so you're going to 60% without a really particularly big control premium being paid there at all. The second factor is that Adcock is basically a March and September end company, and this has come right in at a time when their numbers they'll be closing out, but their numbers obviously not finalised. And the other point is a very short term. I mean, finalisation being looked for here on the 2nd of April. Well, there's simply not enough time to do what independent directors are supposed to do, and that is come out with a fair and reasonable report and pass a comment on it. And in the current circumstances, I would suspect that Adcock's most rational response is they're going to sit and do nothing because they can't actually.
Well, they have already said that
anything
the
else.
board hasn't had time to evaluate the proposition.
Correct. They're giving us a heads up that they probably are going to do nothing.
So this is all tactics now, and obviously,
Yes.
so far, from what I understand, Adcock's board's been very quiet at this point. There hasn't even been an uttering, and I learned that the CEO was apparently surprised when the bid arrived on Thursday last week from Bidvest. So what's actually going on here? It looks at the surface, we can't tell exactly what the motives are of both sides. We kind of get an idea that Brian might be buying this company because it's at a low ebb as it's been described in the media. But what's he seeing? He's got to have a stronger reason to go and buy an acquisition of that size than just potentially a company that he's never, in a sector that he's never entered into before.
And also, just to add to that, isn't this a hostile bid? Why are people reticent to say it is one?
Well, look, put it this way, it's not necessarily hostile because Adcock management haven't said, boo, we don't want you. When they say that, then I suppose it's gloves on and off you go. But I think that said and done, I guess Joffe would prefer to have management on side. The problem is, of course, there's no negotiation, so they clearly don't have a chance to say whether they're on side or not.
And why do you think then that Bidvest haven't pursued negotiation with the company? I mean, it's obviously a lot easier to buy a company if you get the management on board. But it looks like this has really come out of the blue.
Come out of the blue, exactly.
It may simply amount to choice of tactics. I mean, the one thing that Adcock will have that the other pharma companies have not had is stale shareholders. Admittedly, the likes of Cipla were stale for a long time, and then in climbs Cipla India and says, we want you lock, stock and barrel, and off went the share price. So Aspen, of course, has been on a steady tear, and Lita is too small for the market to really take notice of it. But of course, Adcock has had a long flatline, and of course their flatline has been longer than anyone else's. Firstly, because of that problem ARV tender, which it sounds like they missed it by absolutely tiny amount in 2010. The other issue being the withdrawal of the Synap Forte range of medications, which seems to have been fairly arbitrarily done. High Court allowed Adcock to resume selling, I think in late was it 2011, mid-12, something like that. So it created a situation where Adcock will probably have pretty stale shareholders, and yet underlying it, I think Adcock has probably been finding its footing. I think it's also got a perception in the market that it's perhaps been a little bit of a comfortable business. Its relative return measures not as high as other pharma companies, but on the other hand, some of that will be a portfolio.
How does it fit? We know obviously Bidvest is fully diversified in terms of different holdings, but this is, correct me if I'm wrong, their first foray into the pharma environment, or do they already have something established in this space?
It certainly would be the first that I'm aware of in the pharma space. I mean, as far as is Bidvest becoming more of a consumer company? Well, I mean, with the likes of an acquisition like AMAPs, yes, of course they are. They've been in packaging a long time. I suppose their catering services, you could argue, is indirectly consumer. So there was, of course, the attempted bid for Brandcorp. Well, that went out the window. But the point being that there seems to be a little bit of a nudge towards consumer in the Bidvest portfolio. It might be intentional. It might just simply be the dynamics of what's on the table. But that's what it seems to me.
Warwick, we've heard them talk about, obviously Bidvest have a distribution capability, and this would be an opportunity to send essentially more goods down the distribution capability, the distribution channels. But it's a bit of a strange way to go about doing that. You'd rather expect the company to go and bid for that business at a company level or at a contractual level, rather than having to go buy a company just to go and do that. Any idea on where Brian might take this business if he succeeds in getting it?
I guess from the distribution side, that makes sense. I mean, Bidvest certainly has a long, well-established legacy in distribution, logistics, etc. Whether that's simply it's a case of, well, all right, we've got the capacity, let's overlay on it, or whether there's something extra they can bring remains to be seen. I guess that's a nice extra. But I think it is also a case that they see real value in this business that can be harvested.
So we have a decision to make. You obviously hold some Adcock shares for your clients. Are you going to be in favour of this transaction at the moment? Do you think the premium is high enough to induce 60% of the shareholders of Adcock to go with Joffe and Bidvest?
That's quite a tricky one. As I said, the control premium is a bit of a stumble. I mean, if it was 100% bid, I would have said no out of hand, because I think that Adcock management could deliver at least some kind of return on investment in the improving environment that we expect.
So you forward. Actually like the 60% bid?
60%, to be honest, I'd prefer something like 35 or 40. 60%, it's a bit of a sort of a tipping point, to be quite honest. And I think you'll probably find that quite a few analysts and fund managers are going to be pretty much are sitting on the fence until the last moment, I would think.
Do you think this is going to go ultimately hostile then?
Look, we'll see on April the 2nd.
Which is just around the corner.
Which is just around the corner. So you won't get any bets from me
so
on that one.
Let's watch this space. Warwick, thanks so much for your time. Warwick Lucas, Senior Investment Analyst at Amara SP.